Rena! Where's the applause? Come on, you gotta follow the applause. Okay. Good evening, good evening, good evening. You've been watching this Rena Love Fest happening this evening. This is truly a reunion. After a very long period of COVID, Rena, these are people you haven't seen in years, haven't seen you, and this is your first time at Boston College, and we're just so thrilled to celebrate. So thank you for being here for Red Shoe Night to celebrate Rena Espaillat. And if you're still not sure who Rena is or why you're here for Red Shoe Night, you're gonna figure that out very, very soon. My name is Christian DuPont. I'm one of the associate directors in the libraries here, and we're very pleased to say this, I'm looking at some of my archivists on our staff in Burns Library, Rena's archives, her papers to Boston College. So that's what we're celebrating. There we go. So that's kind of the occasion for this evening. We've been looking forward to this for a while. And, you know, we almost nearly got knocked off the schedule because there's a very other big events happening this weekend. But we were here first, we persevered, and we're all here. And thank you for many who have come from around the Dominican community here, around Boston, Powell, River Poets, others are here tonight. So thank you. And we have, I'm looking at James Ajarian, who's helped to support this event through the Religion and Arts Journal and the English department, Suzanne Matson and Eris Weisgott and Andrew Sofer back there, and the Church in the 21st Century. There's Karen and Eileen. Thank you for all the logistical help too, and of course the library. So that's the message from our sponsor. Rena, it's your turn now. Okay, you're gonna tell us all about these red shirts. Okay, you ready? Okay, Rena.
Young, back in the Pleistocene, I took it into my head that I wanted to be a poet. I had learned that in my grandmother's house. She was a poet and a guitarist and a wonderful gardener and all sorts of great things. And following her around was a lesson in everything all by itself. So I fell in love with poetry very, very young. And I thought that it was a matter of dancing, because when I heard my grandmother and her friends reciting poetry in the living room, I was hiding behind the door of the bedroom. And I didn't know what the grown-ups were doing. I had no idea what all these painful deaths and these adventures and all these love affairs that always end up in death and so forth. It didn't mean a thing to me, but I knew that I could dance to it. So I did. I got about 4 or 5 at that point. And every time anybody recited poetry, I wiggled. So poetry came to me through the ears and through the body. It came to me through meter, in other words, through notes. And it wasn't until I was 7 years old and came to this country, to New York, that I realized poetry had another side. Because the nun who was the teacher in my class read a poem about a little boy who died, and his family was heartbroken, of course, and the poem said something about he kissed them and put them there. And I learned later that it was little boy Clue. And what they kissed and put there was his clothing and his games and his toys, his stuffed toys. So I said to myself, but this is what my grandmother is doing. She misses me. I'm the only grandmother. I'm the only grandchild. She had only one at that point. And I said, this is poetry. I'm supposed to be dancing to it and singing and feeling cheerful. I don't feel cheerful, and I started to cry, and they had to take me out of the room. So I discovered that poetry had a very important, very, very important other side, which was, I don't know how to describe it. It's not that it changes what you're feeling or that it takes away the pain. It's that you somehow make sense out of it, that you understand it. You can feel it with your entire body, and you think, well, my cousin Julia Alvarez is here, and she's going up and down because she knows what I'm talking about. And this is, in reality, not only a child's story, but an immigrant story. because those of us who come from somewhere else are very likely to feel that we're somehow lost for a little while, at least when we don't know the language yet. And it's very important to do things with language, to make it your friend. And that has to do with the red shoes. The red shoes are here because ages ago, I wanted to be Edna St. Vincent Millay. And why? I'll tell you. Because she was gorgeous, one strike. She was very sexy, strike two. And she was very tall. She was tall. That's certainly strike three. I was a little round person. And I finally gave up the game and realized I was not going to be the Edna St. Vincent Millay. But I bought the red shoes anyway, because it can't hurt. And then I wore them, and I wore them, and I wore them, and I wore them so much that I didn't realize that they were destroying my feet. But they were, which is why I am the only person in this room who is not wearing red shoes. Why? Because time passes. And as time passes, it does a terrible thing. It makes you old. These are my shoes. They are about 12 inches long and about 8 inches wide. And they don't have any red in them at all. They have little puppies. But you know, you have to get used to what you are, who you are, how old you are, what you're still good for, what you're not good for anymore, and you have to live with it. And I think it's a good thing to celebrate the fact that we do know how to live with what is left, because what is left is good to have. It's better than nothing. So that's the story of my red shoes. Red shoes. I bought red shoes the other day. They were on sale, which can't excuse purchasing something so outre. I bought red shoes knowing they're likely to confuse people who've known me day to day for the strict ways and quiet views of those who seldom go astray or turn up in the precinct news. But then again, who knows? I may. I bought red shoes.
Story of the red shoes. Rita, you have somebody, a gentleman sitting next to you, rather closely next to you. He may sit as close as he likes. Okay. Did you hear that, Dana? Carte blanche. All right. I'm going to turn the mic to Dana Joy, who's going to tell a little more of his own story. There's going to be a lot of reminiscences tonight. They're going to connect together in some very beautiful ways. So, without introductions, we're all just human beings here together, right? And that's the most important thing. And Dana, to you.
Well, I've always known that Rena was inimitable, remarkable, adorable, lovable. But tonight, I can celebrate that she's archival. I think my remarks, although personal and coming out of Rena and my relationship, will probably be interchangeable with many, many people in the audience. And I'll let you see why. I first discovered Rena in probably about 91, 92. I got a little book published by a small press. I believe it was sent to me by X.J. Kennedy, fine Massachusetts poet, I hope you all know. And it arrived not long after I'd published an article called Can Poetry Matter? And I was just being deluged by poetry books. But I started then a practice that I still maintain today. Every poetry book that's sent to me, I read the first couple of poems and the last couple of poems. And if they're good, then I try to read the book. And I started reading this book, and it was a delight. It was clearly a first book, because it had a kind of tentativeness to it, but it was different from usual first books. It was an extremely compact, modest book, and gave you a sense of the daily life of the poet. And there was a poem in it that I particularly liked, and I discovered that a composer who is with us tonight liked the same poem called Bodega. And it's a poem, it was quite interesting because it was a very sort of Latino poem, but it didn't have ideas, didn't have opinions. It had sights and smells and tastes and sounds. Beautiful, kind of musical, metrical composition. And, I grew up in a neighborhood full of bodegas, and, I had never read a poem about one. Really never read a poem about one that really struck me. So at that time I was starting to edit a book called, that I'd taken over from X.J. Kennedy called An Introduction to Poetry, and I put it in it. I do believe I was probably the first person ever to anthologize Rina's work. And I loved the poem, and I began reading her work. But on the other hand, I have a kind of theory is that most poets have a signature poem. The problem with, or at least one of the problems with the audience in poetry in the United States is that you say, who should you read? So we should read all of this person's work or all of that person's work. And that's not how people discover poetry. They discover poetry one poem at a time. And they'll find a poem, and they'll love the poem, and then they'll follow it into the poet. And a few years later, maybe 7 or 8 years later, I came across Rina's signature poem. And as soon as I saw it, I fell in love with the poem, and it's called Bilingue, Bilingual. And I put it in this book, and I put it in every other book I've edited. I convinced other anthologists I know to anthologize it, because I learned this when I, during those few years that I've taught, is that every student, no matter what their background, reads the poem. In this case, it's a poem about growing up Dominican American, where the father wants to preserve the old language, but the daughter is being drawn into the new world, the new language. My mother's Mexican, my dad's Italian. I was in 2 households, like this, where there was a world inside the doors of the apartment and a world outside that were irreconcilable from the perspective of the old people. And so I feel that poem really articulates one of the defining experiences of what it means to be American, which is to have moved from one world into another, certainly for immigrants, but I think even for a lot of people born speaking English from American parents. Now, around the same time, we started a conference in Westchester, Pennsylvania, that was dedicated to form and narrative, where we were trying to create an island where people could study these things without having to argue and defend them. Because it seems to me that the right posture for an artist is love and gratitude. But if you get into a professional world, it's ambition and professionalism. Or you get into the real nitty-gritty of poetry, it's envy, resentment, revenge, hatred. And we try to create a little, as it were, the bohemian neighborhood of the city of God, is the way I thought of it. And on our 3rd year, Len Kresak, who I don't think is in the audience tonight, convinced Rina to come. And she was very reluctant. And she was interested in what we're doing, but I think deeply suspicious. And we admittedly were a pretty suspicious bunch there. And she had a very good time. And then something began to happen. Really by the 2nd year when she came, is that Rina, without intending to, because who she is, became, I think, first the den mother this drunken rout, that we were having there. But gradually, she moved from student into the faculty, and she became a kind of, to use a term from Gertrude Stein, her opera, mother of us all. And she was added a kind of maternal radiance, I guess is the right word, to a group that could often be, highly intellectual. And I mean that, I'm a Latin, so I don't mean that as a demeaning compliment. I mean that in the sense, of believing, as it were, that the feminine, the mother, that presence calls forth the best of us rather than the worst of us. And so within probably by the end of the 5 or 6 years, Rena was on the faculty, one of the presences, and brought in those powwow poets, which is this great and mighty northern tribe, that they're, and where I think without question, how many would this powwows please stand? See how many of us, how many there are. And just as Rena in Westchester, in the 21 years of that conference, I think was really a vital national presence. She also created, I think, one of the most significant schools of poetry in New England. And it's diverse, it is tremendously talented, and it's non-academic. It is a community created by, as it were, love and gratitude, by affiliation. And so, when I started a conference on teaching poetry out in California, I brought Rena out because if I wanted somebody to talk to high school teachers, the purpose of this conference was to improve the way poetry was taught in American high schools. Who could be our cover girl except for Rena? So, what I'm saying is that Rena has brought into her teaching, into her personal presence, and into her work, something as a Latin myself, I think is irreplaceable and beyond price, which is a kind of maternal energy. And if you don't think you need it, you're a fool. And my mother would have told you so.
Good, since we're reminiscing here a little bit and let's connect a couple of dots to data, right? So one of I love this, archivable, that's our quote. I'm looking back towards Lynn and Elizabeth back there. You're adding a name, okay. So we manage the archives, we're pleased to have papers. So that's how we met. We met in a library day, right? And you referred to a date, 1992. You had just published in the Atlantic Monthly that groundbreaking article, Does Poetry Matter? Can Poetry Matter, right? And I was at the reference desk of the library. I was finishing, this is a message to all of your students out here this evening, okay? I hope this is a special evening for you, because 30 years on for me, this is a pretty special night. Because you walked in, I was at the reference desk, I was working my graduate degree at the University of Notre Dame, and you walked in and you just were looking around the room and said, I'm Dana Joy. I said, you know who Dana Joy was? I wasn't reading the Atlantic Monthly so much, but you're very kind. And you just sort of started talking with me about, you remember this actually, this was astounding me when we met later at Syracuse, when by that point you were chairman of the National Endowment of the Arts.
Yeah, I'm a working class kid. I educated myself in the public library. The library to me is the foundational democratic and intellectual institution. And so I love libraries. I mean, the main thrill I ever got teaching was I would spend my off hours in the library and find all these things I wouldn't see otherwise. So I went to Notre Dame. I knew something that was a remarkable fact. The president of Notre Dame lived in the library. And I thought that was
The
great.
Theodore M. Hesbury Library, and on
I
the
knew he was-
13th floor, that was Father Ted's office, and
Yeah.
yeah, he'd sleep there
Yeah,
sometimes.
I knew he wasn't, he was a priest, so he didn't have family and kids, but it just struck me as a wonderful symbol. So I went there and I knew there was a special collection. So I came in and I found this handsome, tall young man, with a kind of a long, sleek hair back then, as I recall. And I said, can I look around your special collections? And he says, yeah, so we began showing him around. And the thing that I really loved was that you had a complete run of Victoria Ocampo's Sur, which I had read about. I had owned one issue, and I said, we're taking them out, and I was looking at them all. I think it was horrifying, poor Christian.
They've just been donated to us,
Yeah.
actually, as Robert had written.
And so he was great. He was showing me their Dante collection, and it was, things, and I was very grateful for that.
Right.
And so I said, well, so I wrote him and I said, I have a lot of fine press editions of my work. Can I donate them to your special collection? Because they had a fine press printing thing there. And so I think we just met that once, but it was
Right, so we corresponded after
yeah,
that.
we spent a very pleasant hour together, and it was, and then we stayed in touch.
We stayed in touch. And then you referenced also the, skipping ahead some years, the 2010 Westchester Conference, right?
Yeah.
That's your annual poetry conference that you run with Michael Pike, who
Yeah.
was your fine press poet and fine press printer collaborator. And you produced a broadside for that occasion, which is the same poem of Red Shoes. And if you, okay, so these are collectible. They're, you pay a few dollars on the internet these days to find the 2010 edition of this, okay? So pick up a couple, maybe Rita, maybe Dana, maybe others who are here wouldn't mind signing a little message or writing a line on it, okay? So that's another connection.
Yeah, at Westchester, we believed all the arts, really relate to each other. So whatever keynote speaker we brought in, we had a special broadside made of his or her work, and we also brought composers and singers in to perform settings of poetry, which I'm delighted to see.
We're going to
that
have some settings of poetry and music,
Yeah.
a little bit on.
I'm looking
this
forward
evening.
to that.
Good. All right. And speaking of looking forward, that's a metaphor for desire, right? Does anyone know what an antojo is? Oh, come on. They're Spanish. Julia's answering the question. So, okay, this is where the younger generation needs. Okay, Julia, come. How about it? Okay, Julia, come. This is your cue. This is your cue, because you're going to meet now the novelist and the poet Julia Alvarez. And then tonight you'll go home and you'll look for some of her books, and there are many more recent autobiographical books. But you're going to discover among them, how the Garcia girls lost their accents. Oh, okay, now you're getting it. And Antojo is like the first or second chapter there. Yeah, which means, by the way, I gave you the hint before, it means desire, okay? So we have a great desire to hear about your reminiscences, Julia.
Do I need a microphone? Is this on? Hi, hello, everybody. Yes, I wrote, unlike Dana, my dear friend, I write my stuff down because I always get a little flustered in front of so many people, but I'd like to say what a pleasure it is to be here to celebrate one of my favorite people and poets, Rina, and translators, Rina Espaillat. But first and foremost, in the spirit of Rina, someone was always quick to acknowledge the invisible people who make things happen. I want to give a special thanks to everyone that made this evening happen, and most especially Christian, who Those of us who have worked in academia know what a labor of love it is to put a celebration like this together. I know that others will speak more critically about Rina's work, but it's actually a love fest. So I'll skip that paragraph because I'm joining the Love Fest. So, Rina, I don't know how or where we first met, though she reminded me this afternoon, but in typical Dominican fashion, we immediately set about trying to figure out how we were related. Since we both share the not so common Dominican surname Espaillat. It turns out that we are distant cousins. My maternal grandmother was Felicia Espaillat. And believe me, I've claimed bragging rights ever since. Anything to bask in your reflected light. Oh, no, we know where the light comes from. So, my favorite title for Rina, besides Prima, comes from our homeland, the DR. And that title, or moniker, and Dana already referred to it, is Mai, M-A-I. Mai is an affectionate Campo way to refer to our mothers. Amai is a mother with a capital M, the mother of all mothers. I hope it's okay to call you that in public, Prima. I know you've been called worse. Too tidy in that poem for Evan, who says I am too tidy, your grandson, right? Yep. And also Yenta, as I learned from your keynote speech you gave at the Westchester Poetry Conference. Amai is, well, there's so many Dominicanos here, I don't have to explain it, but Amai is generous. Her table always has room for one more, a buen tiempo. She's ready and willing to do what needs to be done, no whining, no complaining. But Amai is no masa de pan. And apologies to the spirit of Rina's father, who would not approve of my Spanglish. Mixing the two languages back and forth as we learn from bilingual. Anyhow, Amai is nobody's fool. Mais have a keen eye for details and a sharp tongue for any BS, but also a compassionate good nature that forgives and sees the best and the worst in us and loves us anyway in all our rich complexity, or tries to. I always love that Rina poem always makes a statement that pulls it back a little bit, right? Reins it in. Here we go. So, Rina is incredibly generous, willing to roll up her sleeves. She's helped me with translating some of my work in Spanish, since unlike Rina, I'm really not truly bilingual and fluent in Spanish. In one instance, I sent Rina a little poem I wrote in English for a tia's funeral in Santiago. The family wanted to print it in her memorial card, but in Spanish. So I emailed mi prima, mi mai, mi Rina, and it came back sounding a little better in her Spanish version than in my English. As if she didn't have better things to do with her exquisite translating genius, like translating Sor Juana Inés in San Juan de la Cruz, Manuel del Castro, Robert Ross, Richard Wilbert. I blush to think of taking your precious time away from the greats to help with my little ditty. Oh, come on. That same generosity extends to how Rina creates community for many of us. And in a diaspora, this belonging is critical. The Rina never limits her table to her kin or her fellow Dominicans. As she notes in her poem translation, we're all immigrants in this beautiful, baffling life, and all our dialogue is translation. Her work with the Powwow Poets, many here tonight, the Newberry Literary Festival, her participation with Miércoles Letras, founded by Juan Matos, who's there. But please forget about the poetry. Look at it's beautiful. He reminds me that his mother would say when she was complimented for her dress that it was the hanger. Está hecha. All bear witness to her convening skills. Rena shares the wealth among the living, but also among the dead. Translation is not just an act of great skill, patience, and humility, as she has noted, but also of generosity. Rena wants us all to be nourished and enriched by what we can't individually access with our monolingual limitations. So praise be, to quote her, for that glad woman, ragged with busy giving, all tumbling out of their lives into my living. I also have to mention Rena's activism. She's a person of solidarity, but she is discerning and careful, a form of accuracy and respect to what she puts her name to. She reads the fine print and doesn't blindly sign on. I recall recently sending her a rather long petition protesting the Dominican government's treatment of Haitians and Haitians of Dominican descent. I signed on after the first paragraph, but Rena, she read the second and the third paragraphs as well, which asked for a boycott of writers from Israel to the Dominican Republic Book Fair because of that nation's treatment of Palestinians. Rena responded thoughtfully that she could sign on for the first paragraph, but not the subsequent ones, as she didn't believe writers should be held to account for the foolishness and injustices of their country's oppressive policies and regimes. Think, she told me, about where we would all have been during the last presidency. And then she, to quote her, said, nothing at all should be signed without being first read with a microscope. She advised me this way, she's not just my eye, but my moral compass. Finally, what we're here for tonight, her poetry. And the only reason to have dwelt on the whole person is that all these qualities she brings to bear in what she writes. Her generosity, her curiosity, her accuracy, her sass, her keen eye and lack of arrogance, so that everything gets her thorough, absorbed, and exquisite attention, from cockroaches to begonias to dogs to people who fall asleep at her poetry reading. She celebrates the ordinary, picks it up, turns it around and around until it radiates with rich complexity, meaning, and new life. These moments become, for this reader, sacramental. Many of them taking place inside the commonplace chores of everyday housekeeping and mothering. The ordinary becomes extraordinary in her hands. And since I'm trying, I really cut this short, believe it or not, I won't even get into her mastery of form, how she makes them seem so effortless. Rena has received impressive awards and medals and loving recognition from her fandom, small but intense and loyal, including in 2020, a petition I signed after reading it with a microscope to make Rena our inaugural poet. Amanda Gorman was a great choice, but how cool it would have been to have Rena an elder mistress of her craft alongside this young voice. What a cool thing. All of these honors and recognitions Rena carries lightly, with equanimity. Never do I sense self-importance in her work or in her person. It's as if her considerable giftedness is a gift to her as well. But the one recognition I want to end with is the one she received from the Cultural Affairs Office at the 10th International Book Fair in the Dominican Republic. One of the capital's streets was named after her for a year. Come on, mi gente. Just 1 year? Just 1 year? Just 1 year? I'm going to circulate a petition starting tonight to change the name of that street permanently. As I know, there are many of us who want to live on Lina Espaillat Street forever, right? But I think I better,
We'll do some reading later, Julia.
we'll do something.
Will do, right.
Yeah.
And by the way, some of you, especially those of you who are creative writing concentrator students and maybe others, and some of our powwows, as the night goes on, you know, we'll be here as long as we want, okay? So we might bring others to read a little bit, right? So
And
we'll circle
her
back.
books and Dana are
And
for
yes,
sale back there.
We do, yes. So the books are plenty. So we're going to do a little musical interlude at this point, and we're going to be introduced to a very special art form we call melopedia, or they call melopedia. And while the musicians come on, I just mentioned that before Dana leaves the stage, if you didn't, we have another program tomorrow at lunch here, same room, same place, noon, okay? And Dana's going to be speaking on poetry in the Catholic imagination, which we talked about, Can Poetry Matter, being that 1992 essay, and it was what, in 2011, Dana? I guess it was when you wrote on the Catholic Writer Today, right? So another sort of groundbreaking essay, as well as being a poet and critic here. So we're going to hear more about that. It's especially relevant for our BC community, I think, and it's bringing out those themes again of love and gratitude. Gratitude really being very much a heart of our BC and Jesuit spirituality. Was that enough time to transition to getting John Tavana on stage? And Roger Kimball is coming up behind. Okay, as long as I move out of the way. There we are. Okay.
And you know, I just want to make a note that Christian's not archiving Rena's work just for 1 year.
That's right. Forever.
Yeah. What?
Behave yourself.
It's working now, Roger.
There's what? Have mobility issues. So where's this thing? Oh, okay. It's just right. You just walk straight into
Red shoes. I bought red shoes the other day. They were on sale, which can't excuse purchasing something so outre. I bought red shoes knowing they're likely to confuse people who've known me day to day for the strict ways and quiet views of those who seldom go astray or turn up in the precinct news. But then again, who knows? I may. I bought red shoes.
I consider it.
Thank you, Alan Bull. We were commissioned for that. Fellow Newburyport. Rita lives in Newburyport, up the way here. A lot of Ritas up there. Alan is a well-known citizen of that community and a wonderful artist, and delighted in doing this painting of the red shoes for us. Those are the original red shoes. So thank you, Alan.
If you ask me,
If you ask me,
said the snake,
this couple's doomed. They started naked, not a thing to need, a thing to wonder at, since orders boomed over the speaker. Every day they weed a little, see what's ripe and pluck it off. Eat this, no, don't eat that. No, I'm not blind. I see her fidget with her hair and cough, that nervous cough. She's bored out of her mind. I see him gawk at birds and flap in vain. Then his blank eyes cloud over with the sky and circle his estate. So green, so plain. She's ripe to risk herself. They need to die. Unbanished, he's an ornament, a brute. We're neighbors. I'll go visiting with fruit.
I dreamt you young. I dreamt you young, my father, in your white shirt sleeves and soft fedora, rowing toward me, smiling, where I stood on shore, a slight tilt of your head inviting me aboard. The drops your paddles scattered, stroke by stroke, wafted a summer scent, both rank and sweet, from reedy depths that shimmered like swirled smoke. Your laughter lifted all but swept my feet over the thwart to find the seat beside you, Father, studied by your outstretched hand. But cries of children born after you died woke me to my familiar place on land. I have grown older now than you were then, but not too old to be your child again.
Thank you.
Okay. What's next, right? Okay. So, we're going to learn a little more about Rita's life here, okay? Oh yeah, I should get on the microphone. Just check the program, right? Good. Oh, that's what I was supposed to do back there. Well, you have a copy, Nancy, right? Of the Once and Future News. You have a copy of your book with you, Cecile? Good, okay. So please come up. Okay. We've already heard some wonderful stories about Rita's life, growing up in the Dominican Republic, coming here to the United States through New York, where she was a teacher for many years, and how she came into publishing her poetry a little bit later in life. We're going to hear a bit more about her biography now, and we have, there's Nancy Kang, who's joining us. came from Winnipeg, Manitoba last night here, as you've been teaching, okay? And then Silvio Torres Sayantu is here from Syracuse University, where I also used to work. You want to let them introduce themselves as well as talk about their book. This is really a critical biography then of Rina called The Once and Future Muse. So we'll turn it to you, and then let's make sure we have enough microphones for all of you, okay? And Sylvia, maybe you can come even a little closer to Rina. There you go, okay.
I wasn't sure if I was working.
Thanks, Christian.
You're even handsomer than Dana. Oh, yeah. You're even handsomer than Dana, that's what I was saying, okay.
So let us try to think of a couple of moments that were formative to Rina. I'll begin by, because it is my turn, and it is for me to begin, because Nancy chose that I should begin, since I've known Rina for longer, or she's probably sort of paying respects to her older colleague.
Sure.
So, Rina, Polonia Espaillat. It is, of course, a treat to be here, partaking of this festival of admiration and solidarity with Rina. Celebrating the transfer of Rina's papers from 12 Charon Drive in Middlebury, to
Newbury.
In Newburyport, yeah. Just to the archives of the Boston College libraries. I imagine how many more readers will now be able to access the treasure troves, right? That are the papers of Rina Espaillat, those valuable resources. But of course, we owe gratitude to Christian Dupont, as well as the team that he is working with. He is the John B. Burns Librarian and Associate University Librarian for Special Collections. It is his initiative that has led to the administrative steps that have enabled us to be here celebrating the outcome. Rina, a State Department document shows Rina's family in a diplomatic list shows Rina's family in Washington, D.C. in 1935, November, and they sort of referred to the previous year. So the family has started their tenure as members of the Dominican legation to Washington, D.C. And Rina had been born in 1932. So we're talking about that her U.S. experience began when she is a toddler. Yeah? The head of the Dominican legation, Don Rafael Brache, her father's uncle, led while leading that legation, wrote to the dictator back home a disagreement with the massacres, that were taking place in the Dominican Republic and the Haitian Dominican border, ordered by the Dominican state, and that correspondence earned them, of course, a disagreement with the government makes you unpatriotic, especially instances of condemnation and enemy of the people, and so they became persona non grata first, and also they could not dare to return home because you did not fool around with a person who is willing to kill thousands of people overnight. So basically, overnight they became it's not a diplomatic family, but a family of political exiles. So they had to find a residence in. They left New York City, went to. They left Washington D.C., went to New York City, where they sought to make themselves, make their lives viable, which required money. So with the kid, they did not feel that they could provide for the kid. They had to first try to survive there, create a safe space for them, and then actually, deal with the kids. So they actually, the mom actually took the very dangerous, action of actually bringing Rina back to place her with family there. And then it took until, this was 1937, it took until 1939 for them to bring Rina back. Many of the memories that Rina recalled when she was surrounded by poetry, performance, and the arts in general, those date to that moment when she went back and it was brought not to Santo Domingo but to La Vega, where aunts and grandparents lived. Yeah?
The center of the universe.
Which was the center of the universe. And so, yeah, then Rina was brought back in 1939, put in New York City public schools. As soon as she went into the classroom, she began to shine, including in English, and then later, especially in English. And soon, her teachers began to note a particular handling of English words, just to form meaning as well as to create the beauty and patterns and all of that. And so they began to see her as a source for contributing to the school journals and newspapers and so on and so forth. And it took and before they knew it, she was already being considered for publication in a more serious manner. So in 1947, a teacher at that school, which I jotted down the name of the school there, Julia Richmond High School. Yeah, in the inside, the Julia Richmond High School, a teacher took the liberty to grab a bundle of poems and send them to the Ladies' Home Journal, yeah? Which published 3 of them.
Wow. As we read
the bios, the bio of Rina in the journal, the way the editor speaks, there's no indication that they know is a child. Right? And so that becomes the breaking, her breaking into print, then gains her also the attention of the New York press, because the schools want to make news out of this. And out of that comes an article dedicated to Rina's achievement. By this time, she was already a senior in the New York Herald Tribune. Yeah. And then came when she goes to college. Then after Julia Richmond comes to college, then she comes under the protective wings, yeah, of a teacher who actually thinks that she should send her material to the Poetry Society of America. And then she gets accepted as a member, and she becomes the youngest poet ever to have been inducted into the Poetry Society of America.
St. Vincent Millay And the shoes fit at that time.
And when 1960, when the society wanted to publish a collection of a commemorative collection of the work produced by members of the society, Rina was included. That was in 1960. The collection is called the Golden Years. The Golden Years. And of course, you can imagine who the other authors would be, right? All the way from Carl Sandburg to Robert Frost, Marianne Moore. I mean, everybody down there, mother, yeah, at the great level of poetry, yeah. Very scary, yeah. And she was a very scary company in that body, right? And so, and then she came under the protective arm, in this case, yeah, of an Alfred. His name was Alfred Dorn, who at the time was head of the society. Yeah?
He was vice president, and he had the wonderful habit, the generous habit, of writing to people he had never seen because he had read a poem by that person somewhere and said, you should try such and such a magazine. Now that's generosity. That is generosity. May he rest in peace.
So I think I would like to stop here. Because I like to connect this to two other Alfreds in Rina's life. But I think I should let Nancy do her. So do not expect the narrative to be continuous. Yeah. Basically, we're trying to cover some some aspects that are not so easily covered in 10 minutes.
So the original assignment from Christian was to have a conversation with Rina, but I think Sylvia turned it into a lecture, which is great and informative. But I'm going to ask Rina some of the questions, and so we'll have a hybrid of both. Okay?
And you should know also that we are not on unfriendly terms. We actually were able to put together this value, right? And that does not happen with enemies.
I love this book so much that when I read it, I went to the mirror and kissed myself in it.
So Rina, given your early fame as a teen poet, when you were younger, did you feel that the creative life was taken seriously or seen as a hobby by your elders?
Well, my mother and father took it very seriously. They bragged right and left. My mother was a dressmaker at the time, and she had people coming to have fittings, and she would, she looked very dangerous, she would take the pins if she was fitting a garment that she was in the middle of making. She would say to the customer, "Read this is my daughter's poem." And then she would hold the pin. So I thought I had better do very well because I did not want people mistreated. But my parents always took me seriously. They loved poetry, both of them. My father used to march around the house reciting in Spanish, loud, like this, with great gestures. And it was one of the things that made poetry really important for me, that it had brought so much joy into the life of people who had had a difficult life and who had to settle for a great deal. But poetry didn't for me.
Thank you so much. Did you want to ask one?
No, I'm going to let you.
Thank you.
Since I've already violated.
You took your time. All right. Rina, we were wondering, since you served as a New York City public school teacher for your primary vocation, what do you think was your best experience and then your least experience while teaching?
Oh, I had so many good experiences. I had students on both ends of the spectrum, kids who needed creative writing and who could do it beautifully and who wrote like professionals. It was wonderful. I enjoyed them very much, but I also enjoyed the ones who needed assistance because they were sweet, they worked hard, they were willing to work hard, and they took you seriously. They took the teaching seriously. So I enjoyed them all, and I felt it was a good way to spend my life. I never regretted the fact that the salary was low, the work was long. Well, I'm looking at a wonderful teacher right there, who is Debbie Sabo, a creative writing teacher in Newburyport. And she's one of those people that the kids just learn from every time she opens her mouth. She has them teaching different forms and so on, and she does it like a game. And then she's happy with it, and they're happy with it. I enjoyed teaching a great deal. I particularly enjoyed making things real that they thought couldn't be real because it was only literature. So we put Medea on trial, and we had different people who were witnesses for her and witnesses for the princess that she killed in a horrible way, and so forth, and they took it all very seriously. They had arguments outside of the class. No, she's not crazy. She was faking. It worked. It made literature feel real, and I like that. I like making them feel that universal things like stories could be thought of as reality if you gave it enough thought.
Thank you. So Rena, we were wondering, how has your definition of womanhood and or femininity changed over the years? Do you consider yourself a feminist?
Yes, I am a feminist. I'm the inheritor of a great deal of non-feminist work, not feminist thinking. People who were willing to put up with whatever the male in the household felt was right and proper. Latin men occasionally misbehave. I know you'll be very surprised to hear that. But I'm glad to say that the young men today, my cousins for instance, people in my family, are behaving very differently. They are now changing diapers. They occasionally start supper. They occasionally wash dishes. And it's a good thing to see it happen because it's justice. It's a kind of justice, and we need it. When that started, my father used to put on an apron and wash the dishes, while my mother did a great many other things. She was a dressmaker in the house. And once the Dominican friends, this was back in the old days, Dominican friends came into the kitchen and said, "Holman, what are you doing? You're wearing an apron." And he said, "Yes, because I'm washing dishes. I don't want to wet my pants." And he said, and then the friend said, "Are you afraid of your wife?" And my father said, "Of course, it's a sign of intelligence." Of course, he was joking, but it was a good joke. And he was never embarrassed by doing what he had to do in the house. He did it with pleasure.
I'm gonna let Silvio ask the last question, the legacy one.
But could I fill in a little bit more? Do I have time to fill in a little bit more background? Do I have time to fill in a little bit my background? Not sure? Oh, it's not working? Okay.
Try this one.
Oh, no,
I have a couple minutes, Silvio, because we want to hear a little bit from Sara Ponte as well.
Okay, so very quickly.
Yeah.
Very quickly. And let me, with the Alfred's thing here, yeah? First say that Rena was included at Hunter College, where she was majoring in English. She had a teacher, Marian Witt.
Yes, Professor Witt. May she rest in peace. Wonderful woman.
Yes, and that woman was so instrumental in continuing to encourage Rena to pursue her literary interests, and so she encouraged her to compete in a Civil University of New York CUNY-wide competition, poetry competition. The judges were W.H. Auden, Marianne Moore, and Carl Shapiro, and Rena. The competition was not to decide who won, but who will be included in an anthology that they would put together. And of course, Rina made it to that anthology as well. And in connection with the Alfreds, when Rina, here's a question. Here's a question. How? Let me interrupt myself to ask.
That's the last question. Sarah's waiting.
Now I've got to hear this.
Okay.
Now I'm scared.
Okay, so there's a story of you being approached and asked, so are you one of the new formalists?
Oh, yes.
And then you provide this beautiful answer.
And I said, no, I'm one of the
Yes?
I'm one of the old formalists because I started writing formal verse very early in life. I didn't see any difference. I write whatever comes. If the poem wants to be formal, it is. If it wants to be free verse, it is. I don't know very much, but the poem is very smart.
So the last one, I promise, yeah?
You're going to hear from her.
Alfred Moskowitz, yeah? This beautiful human being, yeah? You married in 1952.
Yes.
He-
Smartest thing I ever did.
Yeah. Good. And he very easily agreed that you would not be known as, that you would not change your name to Rina Moskowitz, because you already had a name in the literary world. Yeah? In 1952 we're talking about, yeah? And so that's one Alfred who was hugely supportive. Whenever there was a Rina reading, he was front row, yeah, everywhere. And then in connection with the other Alfred who mentioned, yeah, that actually was encouraging you all the time. And then there came this Nickel guy. Yeah, this Nickel guy who was a collaborator, but it's also a constant admirer. You should all read his critical commentary of Rina's Highway Apple Trees. Yeah, which is something that I mean there are many more poets.
Alfred is one of the powwows. He's one of the powwows, and he's one of my children also. I have a great many children. I have a Chinese son named Ernie Liang. I have they come in dozens because I find it very hard to let go of people that I love.
And I close my words by saying, yeah, if I am all scattered here and I'm used to it within minutes, yeah, it's because it's hard to speak about Rina, briefly.
Well, thank you. So another I guess you would call it your daughter. Would you call Sarah Aponte? Of course we'd call Sarah Aponte a daughter. Okay, she's blushing already. Sarah, come up here. And thank you, Nancy and Silvio. And Silvio was talking in the last little bit there about your years at CUNY, the City University of New York, and Hunter College. And here she is. I'm going to change the slides for you in a moment there, okay? Sarah, and you're going to come up and sit next to Rina. And then you're going to start a little conversation with her. Introduce yourself a little bit more while I put up a few slides. Sarah and I are meeting for the first time this evening, but a fellow librarian at the City University of New York for the Dominican Institute. And she's going to tell you about the Dominican Institute Library and also this collaborative translation work. So pick up from here and give me just a minute to switch the slides for you, okay?
Hola a todos y todas. I am so honored to be here with Doña Rina. No Doña, she doesn't like to be called Doña. She's a young person. Look at her beautiful face. Right? It's amazing. And thank you. Thank you so much to Christian Dupont for all the organization behind this amazing evening and tomorrow. And again to all of you for being here, and I am so also honored to be next to Julia Alvarez and of course my mentor, el profesor Silvio Torres Sayan, who was the founding director of the CUNY Dominican Studies Institute, and I grew up with him. So thank you so much, Profe, and of course Nancy and everybody. So I'm going to tell you a story with some slides. I hope you can see them. Yes, if you can, yes. So this began 30 years ago. And the next slide is a letter that Rina sent to Professor Torres Sayan. And I am so happy that at least we're going to have some archival sources in the Dominican Institute, because I know they're going to be in a great home here. But this letter you don't have. But we can share the digital copy. And this letter was from 1993. And it was written in Spanish, and she was introducing herself to Professor Torres Sayan. And she's saying, here are these poems. If you want to include them in an issue that is going to be printed soon, Professor Torres Sayan was the special, the guest editor of that. And what I love is that it's in Spanish. And then she says, and can you read the English version there? No, okay. So I was born in Santo Domingo in 1932. And as a child, I lived in La Vega. I am a family to half of the capital and the entire Cibao. But I have lived in the United States since 1939, and almost everything I write is in English. And what I like about this is how authentic she is, and how much she wanted to come back to her Dominicanness, right? And to connect to the CUNY Dominican Studies Institute and to Professor Torres Sayan, and to be included in an issue that was going to be dedicated to Dominican writers in the United States. She already had an issue. She didn't need this. But she wanted to give, right? Exactly, right? You wanted to be part of that. Why not? And for me, that was amazing. And the next slide is the issue that appeared in 1998. It is called Brújula Compás, and Julia Alvarez is also part of that, with Tia Julia, right? Do you remember, Profe, the
I'm not sure it was Tia Julia.
No, not Tia Julia, yeah, but you have a point right there. And we have the issue at the CUNY Dominican Studies Institute, and yes, we can provide you a copy, Boston College, because we have more copies, okay? So we can talk after this. It's good for you to have the whole collection of Rina's papers. So the next slide is another letter, and let me see if I can. No, that's the poems. They include a translation and where childhood lives. Exactly. And she's near so many other Dominican writers in the United States. So the next slide. What a treat. So the next slide is another letter that Rina wrote, because after that, forget it, they became friends. And in 1998, she wrote this letter. And I want to read this part. It says, I have had the pleasure and honor of meeting in Lawrence several Dominican poets, including Juan Matos, José Segura, Cesar Sanchez Vera, and Julia Alvarez. And I dare to tell you that this diaspora has much, very much, that justifies pride. So can you see from 1998, did you meet that year? Do you remember meeting that? Do you remember this date?
I do. I remember it was the end of the century, sort of. But, you know, I've been through so many centuries already.
So we have that letter in the life. And now, let me talk to you about the honor of working with Rina Espaillat. We had a project, and it was the translation of a selection of the writings of Juan Pablo Duarte.
Who's that, George Washington? Yes, Duarte was the man who really created the Dominican Republic with a great deal of trouble and an incredible amount of sacrifice. He had to sell the house, his parents' furniture, whatever they had, it went into the ammunition into the arms, into the uniforms. So he was quite a guy.
Exactly. And it was for the first time that his writings were translated into English. The writings of Juan Pablo Duarte were kept and preserved by his sister, Rosa Duarte. And we commissioned Rina Espaillat, Kidney Dominican Studies Institute, without paying a cent, pro bono. And that's the way he is. And that's what I admire about you. Incredible. And then, besides that, working with young scholars. These were undergraduate, graduate students, and they had such a beautiful connection. The process was, Rina received the translation drafts, then reviewed the translations thoroughly, provided specific guidelines, and explained each one of the revisions with such grace and patience. And for approximately 2.5 years, we worked via email and Skype. You remember Skype?
Yeah.
That was pre-pandemic, right? And pre-Zoom. So we maintained that academic warmth and fervor through emails and through these meetings. Yes, it was, right? And we also had pictures in the book. So the next one, I wanted to show you one of the emails that she sent. And what she did was, okay, she sent the email, but at the same time, she scanned the email with handwritten notes. Mm-hmm. And very specific, explaining why she was saying that you should use this instead of that. And she provided some advice, and I just, I'm taking some of it. Do not translate words, sentences. Translate meaning. Think about it in Spanish. How do you phrase it? Then think in both languages. Capture the meaning, the mood. Become Duarte, speaking in English. Keep anything that is emotionally valid, but to the attention span of the reader. Write straight to the point, but keep the flavor of the 19th century to a certain degree. Can you imagine? And the next slide this is the book. We published the book. Yes, and it's available at and thanks to Rina's Espaillat's wisdom and exquisite skills, we have this bilingual selection of the writing of Juan Pablo Duarte. And just so people know what he really said, because people quote him without even knowing.
Without his sister, we wouldn't have done any of that.
Claro que sí. La hermana, the custodian.
And this is a family that spent a lot of time in the jungle of Venezuela, where they lived on practically nothing. He was making little things out of grass and out of this, and that's how they lived the last few years of his life. But we made a country.
And everywhere Rosa Duarte went, she went with the papers. And she never, gave them away, or she preserved them in a way that we have them today. And we have a book that is called Apuntes de Rosa Duarte, available also in the Kidney Dominican Institute Library. Yes, claro que sí, las mujeres son tremendas. So the next slide, and I think that you have to do it again, because then we have some books. These are the books that Rina has donated to us. And it's like Julia Alvarez as well. She has sent donations to us periodically. And we thank you for that. And we thank you for all your amazing writing and for never forgetting your Dominicanness.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, good. So we're going to round out the evening now with some more music and poetry. Okay, we actually have two selections. We already heard some, so we're going to a little more Melopea. Okay, with John and Roger accompanying Rita. You're okay. We need to get you some water or something. We've all been eating here. You're just carrying on. You live for this. I know you do. You'll catch up later. Okay. Always do. So, and then we also have a very special performance of original work of yours. This is the first time this is going to be heard, set to music. Okay, we have Kristen Vining here, a composer, pianist, along with, there's Rika, not Rina, Rita Vedera and Caffrey. So in a few minutes we'll have that. But we're going to, I think, do the Malapia first. Does that work good, Alfred? Want to do that? More selections, and then we'll let our ladies warm up. That'll round out the evening. And then, again, we promise students, if you want, to do a little more reading, some more socializing together. I think my friend Eileen was suggesting maybe everyone who has red shoes could get some photographs. So the evening will flow on, okay? But let's, thank you. A couple of things, Rina, yes, before we go.
We have here a man who is very tired and very wonderful. He is one of the people who has done so much for our culture, not only writing, but everything. He supports culture. His name is Mike Justin. And if there is a good deed to be done anywhere, you will find him there doing it. And there is a representative from the future here. This is Cristina Cortez. Not only historical fantasy, really. She has written some of the stories in which the temples of the Aboriginal people speak and tell the history of the people, tell the history of the colonization. And she has also written a great deal of work and done a great deal of speaking for people with what is called handicaps. And she has decided to make nothing of it. That people who have, that everybody has something, and that you live with it, and that you get as far as you can with it. And as she says very, very heroically, if you can't fly, you walk. If you can't fly, you run. If you can't run, you walk. And if you can't walk, you crawl. And that's Cristina. Bodega. Café amargo, frijol seco, guayaba y caramelón, salchicha, arroz, queso criollo, anís, azafrán, miel, jamón, clavo, orégano y romero, malagueta y bacalao. 50 años en un soplo, mi niñez vuelve en el vaho de jalea de chinos, oro en la batea del pulpero, que se esparce como risas por callejuela y sendero. Los recuerdos son hilazas, me tejen de lo que son, café amargo, frijol seco, guayaba y caramelón.
Bitter coffee, musty beans, caramel and guava jam, rice and sausage, nippy cheese, saffron, anise, honey, ham, rosemary, oregano, clove, allspice, and bacalao. 50 years have blown away. Childhood falls around me now. Childhood in another place where the tang of orange sweets, golden on the bender's tray, drifts like laughter through the streets. Memory is filament, weaving what I am. Bitter coffee, musty beans, caramel and guava jam.
donde vive mi niñez.
Where childhood lives.
En las noches tibias de mi pueblecito, velan los mosquitos tras el mosquitero, como si en las largas fronteras del olvido estos centinelas pusieran el recuerdo. Y toda la noche una plática lenta entre el cincolloso y la poncherita, diálogo de pin y de pum que repite lo que dice gota por gota la llovizna.
In my hometown, the nights are warm, and flies are watchful at the net, as if remember posted guards along the borders of forget. And all night long in slow exchange, a dialogue of plunk and plink from leaky roof to rusty basin echoes what the raindrops think.
En el viejo muro cazan lagartijas, la mosca se queja de sus desencantos, láminas devotas unen y confunden muertos venerados, los vivos, los santos. Gallos, 1, 2, luego 5, 6, acosan la noche de la loma al valle. Venga la oración y la luz de la nafe.
Along the wall, where lizards hunt, mosquitoes urge their long complaint, and pious photographs commingle the dead, the living, and the saint. One rooster, 2, then 5 or 6 from hill to valley rout the night, and maids sigh up from creaky springs to morning prayer and kitchen light.
Por mi callejuela de persianas mudas pasan burriquitos grises como el polvo. Tardan olfateando con el suave hocico cáscaras de fruta, galletas, despojos. Camino del río va tomando el alba, donde ayer perdura en recuerdo vivo, donde me conocen las piedras y el agua y me hacen caricias con nombres de niño.
Along my narrow, shuttered street trot little donkeys, gray as dust, stopping to nuzzle here and there at orange peel and cracker crust. And morning takes the river road down to the bank where childhood lives, where stones and water know my name and stroke me with diminutives.
Guidelines. Here's what you need to do since time began. Find something diamond rare or carbon cheap, it's all the same, and love it all you can. It should be something close, a field, a man, a line of verse, a mouth, a child asleep that feels like the world's heart since time began. Don't measure much, or lay things out, or scan. Don't save yourself for later, you won't keep. Spend yourself now on loving all you can. It's going to hurt. That was the risk you ran with your first breath. You knew the price was steep. That loss is what there is, since time began subtracting from your balance. That's the plan. Too late to quibble, now you're in too deep. Just love what you still have while you still can. Don't count on schemes. It's far too short a span from the first sowing till they come to reap. one way alone to count since time began. Love something, love it hard, now, while you can.
Some more rhymes between Rina and Rika. Okay, good. And Rika, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and Kristen and what we're going to hear in a few moments, because this is really very special. And so please. Come close to Rina. Come close to Rina. There we go.
I wore my red shoes and try not to fall. So my name is Rika Katrina Pietläinen-Caffrey, and I'm the new Director of Choral and Vocal Activities here at Boston College. Rina and I met in fall 2018 when I first moved to Boston, and I was teaching at Bunker Hill Community College. And our friend Kevin Very introduced us and said, Rika, meet Rina, Rina, meet Rika, and there's Kevin.
Beautifully in charge of cultural events at Bunker Hill Community College. Pleasure for being here.
So when I met Rina, it was one of those moments that if you read enough Green Gables, it was one of those like kindred spirits that you see in your life. And I just fell in love with her poetry. And there was this one poem, especially for my great-great-grandson, The Space Pioneer. And I say to my composer friend Kristen Vining, who we were teaching together in Walla Walla, Washington, and then when I came to the East Coast, Kristen followed 2 years later, and she's in New York right now. And she flew here tonight to perform these two poems. And this was an interesting project when we talked to Rina first about it, that usually when you hear art songs set to poetry set to art song, it's usually translations, but Kristen had Rina read the same poem, both in English and in Spanish, and she followed the flow of the language. So each setting is completely different. And we will also, so you hear them tonight, just the two of us, and then on November 3rd, on Friday, November 3rd, the Boston College Chorale and the Chamber Singers will perform 3 premieres based on Rina's poetry. The Hang Gliders by Mark Popany, that was originally commissioned to be performed at Carnegie Hall in 2020. Well, it didn't happen. So we're premiering it here this fall. And Kristen's settings, she has reset them for chamber choir and orchestra, and also Zenaida Robles' bilingual. And all of those settings speak very deeply to me as an immigrant and bilingual singer, speaker. And this is for you, Rina. Thank you for being here. Love you.
What's your name? Go down the had left you the perfume of the sea.
You know what's even more beautiful than just hearing Rika sing and the beautiful compositions of Kristen was looking out over all your beautiful faces. And I'm looking at you and taking all my Rika.
This has been an unforgettable night. I'm not going to forget this ever. It's it's a high point, but then I've had so many in my life, I've been lucky all my days, I really have. So I have to thank all of you who have done this, and those who are not here, who said, I'm sorry, but I can't be there because. And
Cesar Sanchez Neres in the Dominican Republic, we got a nice email from him.
yes, I did, yes, I did. And he's one of my sons, very definitely one of my sons. And it's, and I have sons back there. I have Asian sons right back there. So, I am there. So I feel very rich, and not in money or possessions of any kind, but in the thing that matters, which is love.
So we can continue to be together as long as we want this evening. The library's open till midnight or so, I don't know. Are there some students who would like to read a poem with Rena up here? I'm seeing little professional faces. So what about you? Where do you go? Come on.
Let me read a poem that's a bridge to the
A bridge to the read. Oh, that's right, Alfred. You got me on cue here. All right, this is gonna make you do it, okay? Because so this will do it. This will be yeah. You want? Thank you. Good.
Now this poem is to serve as, oh no, I forgot This short poem is going to serve as a bridge between the program part of the program part of this evening and the freeform part of this evening. And it's very well designed to do just that because it's going to require a little bit of group participation. Now, it's just a 6-line poem with a many line preamble, obviously. But the second line of this poem reads like this: "We ought to build a monument." Sounds like a line of tetrameter. It's really a line of pentameter. There's one I am left, which you are going to supply. I'm going to say, "We ought to build a monument," and you're all going to say, "Hooray!" You can't say hurrah, there's a rhyme to consider. So no hurrahs. Yeah, no Cheerios. But anyway, and one other thing you'll need to know before we get started, I'm going to read the epigram of the poem before I read the title, because to be sure, the title is going to dampen your enthusiasm of that hooray. You're not going to know why you're saying hooray. You're just going to have to trust me, all right? Trust me. So, but here's the factoid, the historical factoid you need to have in mind. The Boll Weevil Monument in downtown Enterprise, Alabama, commemorates the pest that devastated their fields for its profound influence on their agriculture and economy. I used to think I would make this up, we should have one of the slides with the monument, the picture of the statue of the boll weevil, because I didn't make this up. Now here's the title of the poem: Proposed Statue of the Dominican Dictator, Rafael Trujillo. Remember, you're going to cheer at the end of the second line. In fact, let's practice it one time, right? We ought to build a monument. Hooray! Yeah, you're already pretty good. All right, so, like Alabama did with its boll weevil, we ought to build a monument. Hooray! To thank that man of tyranny and evil for sending Rena Espejo our way. And if, alas, this statue makes her frown, I fear it may, it should be loads of fun to tear it down.
So does that work? Who's going to build a monument tonight? Come on.
Let's sit it down. Let's sit it down first.
Tear it down first. Brilliant. If not, we'll call on some of our Powell friends to read. Okay, one. I don't know.
Gracias a usted. Thank you so very much. I think that I speak for everybody else to say that knowing Rina and having her as a mother and mentor is a privilege, one of the greatest privileges in our lives. And I remember sending an email to Professor Silvio Torres Sayan in occasion of Worcester recognition. I said, the guilty one is Rina Mai, because the fact that I had the opportunity to share my poetry is because her translations. And in that way, in such a quality way that I feel represented in every single verse that she translated. So Mother, as we call her, Rina Mai, Professor and Mother Julia Alvarez explained already, when we say Mai, is Mama in our campus. You know, teacher, that I owe you more than verses, and that certainly it is beyond me to even that account, because the sunlight of my life and days were your face, your warmth, and your faith. These depth to your ancestral love, growing spiritually, unfolds from infinity wonder, rays in your wombs, blooms, increases day by day. With what formula shall I name you, Rina Mai? After your name, every word becomes superfluous decorations, except that I love you. Usted sabe, maestra, que le debo más que versos y que definitivamente es imposible cancelar factura, porque el sol de los días de mi vida tiene su rostro, su calor, su fe. Esta deuda a su ancestral amor asciende función espiritual, deriva en infinita maravilla, germina en su vientre, nace, se multiplica día a día. ¿Con qué algoritmo nombrarte, Rina Mai? Después de su nombre, cualquier frase es un adorno innecesario, excepto que la amo.
Okay, who's going to stop Silvio from going on about Rina? We're going to back her. We're going to come back. I can see somebody wants to. I'm feeling something from this side of the room. How about that? Come on, Riders BC. Show yourselves. There we are. Okay. Yeah, okay. Show off the motion.
to the Plow. Plow magazine, beautiful magazine that is open-minded, friendly, and understands human feelings.
Thank you very much. We felt your support. We have a contest, a poetry contest every year, run by Plow, and it's had increasing response from many, many poets. You're very encouraged to submit your poetry this year. There will be a contest judged in 2024, and Mike Jester is our main judge. And yeah, well, the contest is Rina Espega contest. Now, I wanted to read the winning poem from last year by Bruce Bennett. I used to bring back flowers for my mother. I'd stop the car and gather a small bunch. She'd always be surprised and always grateful. She'd put them in a vase. Could we have lunch? I wasn't free, but that part didn't matter so much, I told myself. It was the thought. She loved my stopping by for those few minutes. Still, I'd feel guilty, since I felt I ought to visit far more often and for longer. She never said it, but I knew she knew that I could make the time. I'd sometimes linger, but then I'd go do what I had to do, hoping that what I could and did not say might be made up for by that small bouquet. The picture online is by Odilon Redon, one of my favorite painters. Bouquet of flowers.
He's the one who does the pictures that look as if they're fading into the back.
Yeah, same.
And fading into each other.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Of course, for any celebration for Rina, any day, any moment, any instant, we have to be part of it, because we met too late, Rina. But that's okay. We're taking advantage of every day, every time. I am here with Rina because of the other side of the border. For this celebration, we have to be represented. This is more than in the name of poetry. This is in the name of a land that is one. A land that shares the same skies, the same joy, the same music, the same beauty, the same ocean. Yes. And we met around poetry, and then we discovered that the words we speak, the words in that art we celebrate, they speak country, they speak nationality, they speak brotherhood, they speak unity, they speak humanity. And then we discover that we share translation. From Spanish to Creole, from Creole to Spanish to English, to all the many languages the many languages we met here in this country. And for that alone, we will always celebrate Rina. And then I want to tell you on this day of your celebration, in the name of all of us on the other side of the border, we say thank you, we celebrate you. Life is good.
Thank you very much. And you know the person you should thank is this man's wife. What happened to my cousin? Because I'm going to tell the story about this couple. This couple is Julia and her husband Bill, who went to the Dominican Republic, saw a piece of land that they liked the look of. They said, we could do something with this, and they started a coffee plantation. And then it did very well, and I drank the coffee, it was wonderful. And then they said, you know, there's no school here, but the workers have children, they need a school. So they built a school. And then they said there are no medical possibilities here. Who's going to take care of the people who get sick in this plantation? So they did something medical. And so on, until they turned an empty piece of ground that had nothing much in it into a home for people. And that was Julia, my distant cousin, whom I love very much, and her husband Bill, whom I love very much.
Thank you.
And I want you to know that a great many of us want the Creole taught in the Dominican Republic. We want the languages to be exchanged because it's one island and everybody wants to speak.
Forgive me.
I said that a great many of us feel that we should share languages, that we should teach Creole in the Dominican Republic, that we should teach Spanish in Haiti, and that we should be able to speak to one another in one another's language because we are one people.
That I will tell, of course, my dear Rina, a little secret. What the officials, the leaders of countries, of political leaders don't know, the people have their own way. There are places on both sides of that little island that Creole is spoken and Spanish is spoken, and in between, there's a new language being born that is also spoken right there next to the border. So the people have their ways. And then when they travel, they met at universities, may it be here in the United States or anywhere in Europe or in Spain, Dominican and Haitian, they study together and life continues. So there is hope. Of course, there is hope. Thank you.
So now can I finish my
You know what? I'm hungry.
Don't forget the galleon.
I heard that. You can eat everything that's left there. Okay, good. Well, let's, then we'll do it here, okay? And obviously socialize.
I'd like to finish with one poem.
With one poem?
Yes. Is that all right?
Just one.
Just one.
You're reading this one. I
Yes.
presume.
Guys, are we ready?
Ah, okay. Oh, the encore, okay.
About land and about discoveries and Thank you. We're talking about land and discoveries and people who are found there and considered less than human beings, and finally the unity takes place, just as it did in what is now the United States of America. Same thing happened in the other Americas, and we are all Americans, by the way. We are named rightly after the continent. So this is the United States of America, but and this is called Un Galeón de España Medita sobre el Futuro. A Spanish galleon contemplates the future. Some of you have heard this, but I just wanted to end with this because I think it unites us. Sobre mí el cielo, por debajo la corriente. En el viento que llena mis hinchadas velas, una bandada de aves marinas chilla y se lanza, rodeando el cordiaje y de la agitada estela, donde cazan su presa y montan las tormentas. Es que discuten con su estrépito alegre el futuro, desconocido y aún no realizado, pero ya formándose.
Above me sky, and down below the stream. Loud on the wind that fills my swelling sails, a swarm of raucous seabirds dive and scream, circling the rigging in the churning wake, where they hunt their food and ride the gales. Do they speak in the exultant noise they make for the future, unknown and not yet real, but working to become?
Y por debajo la corriente arrastra su peso contra mi quilla, como cadenas que me quieren devolver hacia mi origen. Viento y agua me impulsan hacia dos destinos opuestos, los tesoros del mar y la tierra materna que formó estos hombres, mi tripulación tosca, ambiciosa, inquieta y despiadada.
Under me, the current drags its weight against my keel, like chains pulling me home to Spain again. Wind and water keep me bound in two directions, toward treasures of the sea and the familiar soil that bred these men, my rough, ambitious, restless, ruthless crew.
Ellos también cazan tesoro, aventura, tierra y cargan con todo lo que aprenden ese bulto pesado que es la pobreza, la cruz, el poder que ejerce la mano ajena, energía desbocada, la necesidad de actuar por sí solo, la afición a la ganancia a costa ajena.
They also hunt money, adventure, land, and carry with them everything they've known, that heavy burden, poverty, the cross, the force of power in another's hand, reckless energy, the need to act alone, a taste for profit from another's loss.
¿Cómo verán al extranjero? Una raza distinta, su comida ajena, sus costumbres, dioses, idioma, sus armas y ritos, su color y olor, su rostro. ¿Cómo los verán estos extraños? ¿Como si fuera cada cual un hombre o una horda sin rostro individual que se recibe con odio y con desprecio? ¿Y qué dirá y recordará el futuro sobre esta aventura española en el mundo nuevo y salvaje?
How will they see the stranger, a new race, another's food and customs, gods and speech, weapons and rituals, color, odor, face? How will that other see them? As if each were his own man, or as a faceless horde to be received with loathing and reviled? How will the future judge and then record Spain's juncture with the undiscovered wild?
España. La palabra tiembla de orgullo al recordar su larga tradición del arte, del diseño labrado, de libros en los cuales las palabras lucen como joyas en una corona real, o como cada línea de mi cuerpo, caligrafía en roble, que fluye como cosa viva sobre la marea.
España. The word ripples with pride in its long history of art, design, books in which the words are jewels arrayed as in a royal crown, or as each line of my body, calligraphy in oak, flows like a living being on the tide.
Bendecidos por los ojos de la Virgen, mi galería lleva barandas con medallones en cuadros que evocan nuestros balcones y el arte galante con que se hace el verso en español.
Blessed by the Virgin's eyes, my gallery wears railings whose medallioned squares evoke balconies and the gallant artistry with which the lines of Spanish verse are made.
Quizás estos marineros retoños vivos sabrán echar raíces donde echemos ancla y acabarán ganándose lo que piensan conquistar, y no con armas, sino con su labor, el aliciente, el sueño de algo nuevo, generoso, peligroso, nunca visto antes, más justo y libre que el pasado que se va alejando.
Maybe these sailors, as live transplants do, will take root where they anchor, and at last earn what they seek to conquer, not through war, but through labor, the dream of something new, generous, risky, never seen before, more just and free than the retreating past.